The grand estate sat on the edge of the Pacific coastline, its sprawling glass walls reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, designed to evoke both awe and envy. To the world, it symbolized power and success. To Eleanor, it was the echo of a past she had fought desperately to leave behind. The invitation had arrived a week prior, formal, elegant, and unsigned. Its embossed edges bore the faint scent of cedarwood, a fragrance she knew all too well. She had held the card for hours, her fingers trembling as she debated whether to accept. Curiosity eventually won, dragging her back to a life she thought she had abandoned forever. 10 years had passed since Eleanor left Alexander Grant. 10 long years since she had walked out of their marriage, leaving him to raise their 5 children alone. The decision had shattered her as much as it had him, but she had convinced herself it was the only way to preserve her sanity. Alexander, the relentless CEO of Grant Industries, had been consumed by his empire, leaving Eleanor feeling invisible and suffocated. She couldn't breathe in his shadow, nor endure the pressures of being the wife of a billionaire everyone envied, but no one truly understood. As she stepped out of the car and onto the estate's expansive driveway, memories washed over her. The laughter of children, the late-night arguments, the weight of a love too heavy to carry, it all came rushing back. But this place, this mansion, was different. It wasn't the home they had once shared. This was something new, a testament to a life that had moved on without her. A sleek black car pulled up beside hers, and a tall, striking man in his mid-30s stepped out. His tailored suit fit perfectly, and his polished shoes glinted in the evening light. "Eleanor," he greeted, his voice smooth yet tinged with surprise. "I wasn't expecting you." "Connor," she replied, recognizing Alexander's younger brother. The years had been kind to him, but there was an edge to his demeanor now, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. He hesitated, studying her face. "I suppose you're here for the unveiling." Eleanor frowned. "Unveiling?" Connor smirked, though there was no humor in it. "You'll see." Before she could ask more, the heavy oak doors of the estate swung open, and the sound of classical music drifted out. Eleanor's heart clenched as she stepped inside. The grandeur of the place was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and art pieces she could only assume were worth more than most people's homes. She was ushered into a grand hall filled with impeccably dressed guests. Familiar faces from the business world, politicians and socialites mingled with glasses of champagne in hand, yet her eyes searched for only one person. And then she saw him. Alexander stood at the far end of the room, his back to her as he spoke with a group of executives. His presence was magnetic, commanding attention without effort. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe it was the sheer confidence that made him seem larger than life. His tailored navy suit clung to his broad shoulders, and his hair, now streaked with silver, gave him an air of distinguished authority. Her breath caught in her throat. This was not the man she had left a decade ago. That Alexander had been driven, but distant, his warmth buried beneath layers of ambition. The man before her now radiated something different, purpose, fulfillment. But there was also a coldness, an impenetrable wall that hadn't been there before. He turned as if sensing her gaze, and their eyes met. For a fleeting moment, time seemed to stand still. The room, the music, the crowd, it all faded away. His expression didn't betray even a flicker of emotion, but the intensity in his eyes was enough to leave her unsteady. "Eleanor," he said, his voice deep and composed as he approached. "I didn't think you'd come." She forced a smile, her palms damp with nerves. "I wasn't sure I would, but your invitation was hard to ignore." He raised an eyebrow. "My invitation?" Her smile faltered. "Wasn't it you who sent it?" Alexander studied her for a moment, then gave a small, enigmatic smile. "Perhaps we should talk later. There's something I need to attend to first." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her more confused than ever. Eleanor's gaze followed him as he moved through the crowd, stopping to speak with a young woman who looked eerily familiar. The woman was in her mid-20s, with dark hair and sharp features, a striking resemblance to Eleanor herself in her youth. Eleanor's chest tightened as realization dawned. "Lila," she whispered. The girl was their eldest daughter, now a woman. Eleanor hadn't seen her or any of her children in 10 years. Lila's laugh carried across the room, warm and vibrant, but there was a guardedness in her posture, a hesitance that mirrored Alexander's. Eleanor's heart ached as she watched her daughter interact with guests, every movement a reminder of how much time she had lost. The evening unfolded in a blur of polite conversations and strained smiles. Eleanor tried to piece together fragments of information from the snippets she overheard. It became clear that tonight wasn't just a social gathering, it was the launch of something monumental. The estate wasn't merely a home, it was the headquarters of a groundbreaking initiative Alexander had spearheaded. Whispers of philanthropy and innovation filled the air, but the details remained elusive. Finally, as the clock struck 9, the room quieted, and Alexander stepped onto a raised platform at the center of the hall. The crowd turned their attention to him, their anticipation palpable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and commanding, "thank you for joining me tonight. What I am about to share is the culmination of 10 years of work, a vision born from both pain and purpose." Eleanor's heart pounded as she hung on his every word. This was what she had come for, though she couldn't quite articulate why. What had Alexander built in her absence? And why did she feel as though she was the last to know? Alexander gestured toward a massive screen behind him. As it lit up, images of children, families, and communities filled the room. He spoke of a foundation he had established, a global initiative dedicated to providing education, health care, and resources to underprivileged children around the world. The foundation, he explained, was inspired by the lessons he had learned as a father. "I once believed success was measured by power and wealth," Alexander said, his voice softening. "But I learned that true legacy lies in the lives we touch, the hearts we heal, and the futures we build." The crowd erupted into applause, but Eleanor could only stare. This was not the man she had left. This was someone entirely new, someone who had taken the shards of their broken life and forged something extraordinary. As the applause died down, Alexander's gaze found hers once more. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something, a challenge perhaps, or an unspoken question. Before Eleanor could make sense of it, the lights dimmed and the evening's celebrations resumed. But she knew one thing for certain. The man she had left behind was not the man standing before her now. The night was winding down, but Eleanor's mind raced. Alexander's speech played over in her head, each word carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. He had changed. No, he had transformed, yet she couldn't help but wonder. What had driven him to this? What had she missed during those 10 years? She found herself wandering through the estate, away from the bustling crowd. The distant sound of laughter and clinking glasses faded as she stepped into a quieter hallway. The walls were adorned with photographs, smiling children from different corners of the world, families holding certificates of completion from the Foundation's programs, and volunteers working in remote villages. It was a visual testament to Alexander's work, but also to the man he had become. One photograph stopped her in her tracks. It was a candid shot of Alexander sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a group of children. They were laughing, their faces lit with joy. His expression was one of pure contentment, a stark contrast to the stoic businessman she had once known. "You've been staring at that picture for a while." Eleanor turned to find Lila standing behind her. The girl, no, the young woman, crossed her arms, her posture defensive but her eyes wary. "Lila," Eleanor said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You look so grown up." Lila tilted her head, her lips curving into a bitter smile. 10 years will do that to a person." The words cut deeper than Eleanor expected. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of facing her daughter. "I'm sorry," Eleanor began, her throat tightening. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but Why are you here?" Lila interrupted, her tone sharp. "After all this time, why now?" Eleanor hesitated, searching for the right words. "I didn't know about the Foundation, about everything your father has done. I wanted to see it for myself." Lila's eyes narrowed. "Is that all? Curiosity?" "It's more than that," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "I wanted to see all of you. I've missed you every day." "Missed us?" Lila's voice rose, anger bubbling to the surface. "You walked out on us, on Dad. Do you have any idea what that did to him, to us?" Eleanor's heart ached at the venom in her daughter's words, but she knew she deserved every bit of it. "I was drowning," she admitted. "I thought leaving would be better for everyone, but I was wrong. I see that now." Lila shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "You don't get to just show up and say you're sorry. It's not that simple." Before Eleanor could respond, Lila turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the dimly lit hallway. The confrontation with Lila left Eleanor reeling, but it also fueled her determination. She needed to understand what had happened in her absence, to her children, to Alexander, and to herself. She found Alexander in the study, a room that seemed untouched by the grandeur of the rest of the estate. It was intimate, with shelves lined with books and a single leather armchair by the fireplace. He stood by the window, gazing out at the moonlit garden. "You always loved quiet spaces," Eleanor said, her voice tentative as she stepped inside. Alexander didn't turn to face her. "Old habits die hard." She hesitated, unsure how to bridge the chasm between them. "I spoke with Lila." He nodded, still staring out the window. "I thought you might." "She's angry," Eleanor continued. "Hurt. But she's strong, so much like you." At that, Alexander finally turned to her, his expression unreadable. "She's had to be. They all have." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Eleanor took a step closer. "What happened after I left, Alexander? How did you manage?" His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "At first I didn't. The company was on the brink of collapse. The kids were falling apart, and I was angry. At you, at myself, at everything." Eleanor's chest tightened as she listened. She had imagined the fallout of her departure, but hearing it from him was almost unbearable. "But then I realized," Alexander continued, his voice steady, "that anger wouldn't fix anything. I had 5 children who needed me, a business that hundreds of people depended on, and a life that wasn't going to stop just because mine felt shattered. So I made a choice. I chose to rebuild." His words were simple, but the conviction behind them was profound. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt and admiration all at once. "And the foundation?" she asked. Alexander's gaze softened. "It started as a way to give the kids something bigger to believe in, a project we could work on together, something that would teach them about responsibility, empathy, and purpose. But it became so much more. It became everything." Eleanor's eyes welled with tears. She had left because she felt she couldn't handle the weight of their life together, yet Alexander had taken that same weight and turned it into something extraordinary. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "It's not about pride, Eleanor. It's about doing what needs to be done." His words stung, but she understood. He wasn't looking for her approval. He had built a life that no longer revolved around her, a truth both humbling and heartbreaking. As the evening wore on, Eleanor found herself drawn back to the main hall, where the crowd had thinned but the energy remained electric. Guests mingled in smaller groups, their conversations quieter but no less animated. She spotted Lila again, this time with her younger siblings. James, the second eldest, stood tall and confident, his sharp features reminiscent of Alexander's. Beside him was Emma, her laughter bright and infectious as she teased her younger brothers, Liam and Noah. Eleanor's heart swelled as she watched them. They were a picture of resilience, each one carrying a piece of Alexander's strength and determination. But they were also strangers to her, their lives shaped by years she hadn't been a part of. "Beautiful, aren't they?" Eleanor turned to see Connor standing beside her, a glass of whiskey in hand. "They've grown into remarkable people," she replied, her voice tinged with sadness. Connor studied her for a moment before speaking. "You know, for a long time I resented you for what you did, but looking at them now, maybe it was what Alex needed. Losing you forced him to become the father they deserved." His words were a bitter pill to swallow, but Eleanor couldn't deny their truth. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" she asked. Connor's expression softened. "That's not for me to say, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that forgiveness takes time and action." Eleanor nodded, her resolve hardening. She couldn't change the past, but she could fight for a place in their future. As the night drew to a close, Eleanor stood by the estate's grand fountain, the cool breeze carrying the scent of blooming roses. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Alexander approaching. "Leaving already?" he asked. "I don't belong here," she admitted. "Not anymore." Alexander's gaze was steady. "That's not for you to decide." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "You've always had a way of running when things got hard," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "But if you want to be part of this family again, You're going to have to stay and fight for it." His words were a challenge, but also an invitation. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope. "Do you think it's possible?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alexander's eyes softened. "That's up to you." Eleanor faces a choice: confront the ghosts of her past and fight for her family, or retreat once more into the safety of distance. The following morning, Eleanor awoke to the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below the estate. Her guest room was a masterpiece of understated elegance, light streaming through gauzy curtains, furniture carved from polished wood, and a faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. For a brief moment, she let herself imagine this life as her own again, surrounded by the family she had left behind. But reality came rushing back with a sharp knock at the door. "Good morning, Eleanor," Connor said, stepping into the room before she had a chance to respond. He carried a tray with 2 steaming cups of coffee and set it down on the bedside table. "Figured you might need a boost. Big day ahead." Eleanor blinked, her mind still heavy with sleep. "Big day?" He smirked. "You're coming with us. The Foundation's main site is hosting an open event this morning. Alex thought it might give you a clearer picture of what you missed." Her stomach twisted. Alexander had decided she would attend without even consulting her. The idea of being thrust into the heart of his world, surrounded by his achievements and the life he had built without her, filled her with both dread and curiosity. "Does he always make decisions for everyone now?" she muttered, slipping out of bed. Connor laughed. "He's a CEO, it's kind of his thing. But don't worry, this isn't a power play. It's more of a test." "A test?" He shrugged. "You'll see." By mid-morning, Eleanor found herself sitting in the back seat of a sleek SUV, with Alexander behind the wheel and Lila beside him. The ride was silent, save for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional sigh from Lila, who was clearly displeased with her mother's presence. The destination was an hour away, a sprawling community center built on the outskirts of a struggling neighborhood. The building was modern yet inviting, surrounded by lush gardens and vibrant murals painted by local artists. Children played on the lawn, their laughter ringing out like music, while families gathered under shaded tents to browse tables laden with books, toys, and supplies. Alexander parked the car and stepped out without a word, immediately greeted by a group of volunteers. Lila followed suit, her demeanor softening as she embraced one of the workers. Eleanor lingered behind, unsure of her place. She watched as Alexander moved through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping to shake hands, share a laugh, or offer a comforting word. He was in his element here, a man transformed by purpose. "Ready?" She turned to see James approaching, his expression neutral but his tone less hostile than Lila's had been. "For what?" she asked cautiously. He gestured toward the main building. "Dad wants us all inside for the announcement." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded, falling into step beside him. The interior of the center was bustling with activity, children engaged in workshops, parents attending informational sessions, and volunteers organizing supplies. The walls were covered in photos and charts detailing the Foundation's impact. Thousands of scholarships awarded, medical facilities built, and communities uplifted. At the far end of the room stood a stage where Alexander addressed the crowd. His voice was steady, his words inspiring. He spoke of the Foundation's mission, its accomplishments, and its plans for the future. "Today," he concluded, "we take another step forward, not just as an organization, but as a family, because that's what this work is about, building a future where every child has a chance to thrive." The room erupted into applause, but Eleanor barely heard it. Her attention was fixed on a smaller display tucked into the corner, a series of framed letters and drawings from the Foundation's beneficiaries. One letter caught her eye. It was written in a child's scrawling handwriting, thanking Mr. Grant for helping him go to school. At the bottom, the child had drawn a stick figure of himself, holding hands with a man labeled Dad. Eleanor felt a lump rise in her throat. This wasn't just a project for Alexander. It was personal. After the announcement, Eleanor found herself outside, watching as the children played. She spotted Lila sitting under a tree, reading to a group of younger kids. James was helping set up tables, while Emma and Liam played soccer with some of the volunteers. "Impressive, isn't it?" She turned to find Alexander standing beside her, his hands in his pockets. "It's more than impressive," she admitted. "It's extraordinary." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the children. "This is what matters. not the boardrooms or the profits. This. Eleanor hesitated, then asked the question that had been gnawing at her since the night before. "Why did you invite me here, Alexander?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Because it's time for you to see what you left behind." His words were a punch to the gut, but she refused to let them break her. "I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" His voice was sharp now, his calm facade cracking. "You didn't just make mistakes, Eleanor. You abandoned your family. You left me to pick up the pieces." "I thought I was doing what was best for everyone," she said, her voice trembling. "You thought about what was best for you," he countered, "and maybe that was what you needed. But don't expect to waltz back into our lives and pretend nothing happened." His words stung, but they also sparked something in her, a determination she hadn't felt in years. "I'm not pretending," she said firmly. "I'm here because I want to make things right." Alexander studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "It's not that simple, Eleanor. Trust takes time to rebuild. And the kids, they've moved on. They've built lives without you." "But they're still my children," she insisted. "And I'm still their father," he replied, his tone softening. "But this isn't about us anymore. It's about them." Eleanor nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." As the day wore on, Eleanor found small moments to reconnect with her children. She helped Emma paint a mural, cheered for Liam and Noah during their soccer game, and even shared a quiet conversation with James about his aspirations to follow in Alexander's footsteps. But the most poignant moment came when Lila approached her late in the afternoon. "I've been thinking," Lila began, her tone hesitant, "about what you said last night." Eleanor's heart raced. "And? I'm still angry," Lila admitted. "But I also miss you. I don't know if I can forgive you, but maybe we can start with baby steps." Eleanor felt a surge of hope. "I'll take whatever you're willing to give." Lila nodded, her eyes softening. "Good, because I think Dad might need a little convincing too." Eleanor smiled through her tears, knowing that this was just the beginning of a long journey. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Eleanor felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time she felt ready to face it. But just as the night seemed to settle into a peaceful rhythm, an unexpected visitor arrived. A woman in her early 30s, dressed in a sleek business suit, carrying a briefcase. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her gaze flickering between Eleanor and Alexander. "But this couldn't wait." Alexander's expression darkened. "What is it, Caroline?" The woman hesitated, then handed him a document. "It's about the foundation. There's been a development." Eleanor watched as Alexander's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the document. Whatever he was reading, it wasn't good. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Alexander didn't answer, his focus entirely on the paper in his hands. "Dad?" Lila prompted, her tone wary. Finally, Alexander looked up, his expression grim. "It seems we have a problem." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Eleanor's heart pounded as she realized that whatever was happening, it had the potential to unravel everything Alexander had built, and possibly everything she was fighting to rebuild. What is the mysterious issue threatening the foundation, and how will it impact Alexander's hard-earned legacy and his family's fragile reconciliation? The tension in the room was palpable as Alexander handed the document to Connor, his jaw clenched tightly. "We'll need to act immediately," he said, his tone sharp but calm. Connor scanned the paper, his brow furrowing. "This isn't just a setback, Alex. This is a full-blown crisis." "What's going on?" Eleanor asked, her voice cutting through the growing unease. Alexander turned to her, his expression unreadable. "The Foundation's largest donor is pulling out. Without their funding, several of our key projects are at risk of shutting down." Eleanor's stomach sank. She had seen the impact of those projects firsthand just that afternoon. The children, the families, the hope etched into every corner of the Foundation's work. Losing that would be devastating. "Is there a way to salvage this?" James asked, his usually steady voice tinged with worry. Connor shook his head. "Not without a replacement donor. And we'd need one fast. Faster than we've ever had to work before." Lila frowned. "Why are they pulling out?" Alexander hesitated, then sighed. "It's political. The donor doesn't want to be associated with some of the communities we're expanding into. They think it's too Controversial. Eleanor's heart ached at the injustice of it. So they're willing to abandon all those people? Over optics? That's the reality we're dealing with, Alexander replied, and now we need a solution. As the family gathered in Alexander's study to strategize, Eleanor found herself sitting silently in a corner, watching them work. This was their rhythm, their dynamic, a team forged through years of shared struggles and triumphs. She felt like an outsider, and yet she couldn't ignore the pull to contribute. "Wait," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the discussion. "What about private investors? Smaller contributors who might be willing to step up if they understand what's at stake?" Connor gave her a skeptical look. "It's a good idea, but it's not enough. We're talking about millions, Eleanor. Small contributions won't fill that gap. But what if we combined them?" she pressed. "What if we launched a campaign to reach people directly, families, individuals, anyone who cares about the Foundation's mission? You've already built something extraordinary here. People just need to see it to want to be part of it." The room fell silent as they considered her words. "It's not a bad idea," Lila said reluctantly. "Social media could amplify it. We could show the real impact of the Foundation's work. Tell the stories that make it personal." Alexander nodded slowly. "It's ambitious, but it could work." Connor raised an eyebrow. "It'll take a lot of manpower, and we'll need someone to lead it. Someone who knows how to handle media and public relations." Alexander turned to Eleanor, his gaze steady. "You're suggesting this, Eleanor. Are you willing to take it on?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Eleanor felt the weight of their eyes on her, each of them waiting to see if she would rise to the challenge. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor threw herself into the campaign, working alongside Lila and James, to craft compelling stories about the Foundation's impact. They filmed videos, wrote heartfelt appeals, and shared photographs of the children and families whose lives had been transformed. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. She worked late into the night, fueled by determination and a growing bond with her children. Lila's initial hostility softened as they collaborated, and even James began to open up, sharing insights about his father and their family's journey. Alexander, meanwhile, focused on securing smaller but significant contributions from his network of business associates. Despite their differences, he and Eleanor found themselves working together seamlessly, their shared goal bridging the gap between them. One evening, as the family gathered in the study to review the campaign's progress, Connor walked in with a triumphant grin. "We've hit half our target," he announced, holding up a tablet displaying the latest figures. Cheers erupted around the room, and for the first time in weeks, Eleanor saw a glimmer of hope in Alexander's eyes. "We're not there yet," he said, his voice steady. "But this is a good start." As the campaign gained momentum, Eleanor began to notice subtle changes in Alexander. He was still the commanding, driven man she remembered, but there was a warmth to him now, a vulnerability he rarely showed. One evening, as they worked late in his study, she found herself watching him as he reviewed a stack of proposals. His hair was tousled, his tie loosened, and his expression focused. "You've changed," she said softly. He looked up, surprised. "Have I?" "Yes," she replied. "You're different, more patient, more present." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I had to change, for the kids, for myself. I couldn't keep living the way I was after you left." "I'm sorry for what I did," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I was protecting myself, but I was running away, and I hurt all of you in the process." He sighed, his gaze softening. "We were both hurting, Eleanor. We both made mistakes." For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. "Do you think we can ever move past it?" she asked hesitantly. Alexander's lips curved into a small, bittersweet smile. "I don't know, but I think it's worth trying." The breakthrough came on the final day of the campaign. Donations poured in from around the world, exceeding their goal by a significant margin. The Foundation was saved, its future secured. That evening the family gathered in the garden for a celebratory dinner. The air was filled with laughter and the sound of clinking glasses as they toasted to their success. Eleanor felt a deep sense of fulfillment as she watched her children interact, their bonds stronger than ever, and for the first time in years, she felt like she belonged among them. Later, as the celebration wound down, she found herself alone with Alexander by the fountain. The moonlight cast a silvery glow over the water, and the sound of crickets filled the night air. "You did it," he said, his voice quiet but filled with pride. "We did it," she corrected, smiling. He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "You've proven a lot these past few weeks, Eleanor. To the kids, to me, but most importantly to yourself." She swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "Does that mean we have a chance?" Alexander hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. "It means we have a choice. To let the past define us or to build something new." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "I want to build something new. With you. With all of us." For the first time in years, Alexander smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that melted the last of her doubts. "Then let's start," he said, pulling her into his arms. The months that followed were a testament to the power of resilience and love. Eleanor worked tirelessly to rebuild her relationships with her children, while Alexander continued to lead the foundation with renewed passion. Together, they found a balance that had once seemed impossible, a partnership built on trust, forgiveness, and a shared purpose. In the end, the legacy they built wasn't just about the foundation or the lives it changed. It was about the family they had fought to heal and the love that had endured against all odds.